The gavel falls, silence grips the chamber, and all eyes lock on King Charles. No one could have imagined that inside these historic walls, the monarch himself would collapse under the crushing weight of truth. The courtroom, once a symbol of unshakable tradition and authority, had become something else entirely, an arena of reckoning where masks were torn away and reputations weighed on scales of justice that no royal privilege could tilt. The echo of that gavel still lingered in the air when Charles stepped forward, his shoulders squared in defiance of the storm inside him, yet his eyes betrayed the truth. This was no king entering his throne room. This was a man about to face his own undoing. The audience leaned in, breaths held tight, whispers rippled like shadows in the silence, curling around the carved wood of the chamber's walls. All waited for the moment, the strike of revelation. And when the doors opened once more, Catherine appeared. Princess Catherine, her presence, alone, shifting the air. For years, she had been seen as dutiful, steady, a figure of grace rather than confrontation. But today, there was fire in her step, and those who looked closely swore they saw the weight of destiny pressing against her shoulders. The gallery gasped because they knew why she had come. She was not here to smile politely. She was here to speak. At the far side of the chamber, Camilla sat rigid, her posture carved in stone. To some, her face was a mask of dignity, but to others, those who studied the flicker of her eyes and the tightness of her lips, it was clear she was bracing for an impact she feared but would never admit. The storm brewing behind her composure was a storm Catherine herself had stirred, and its first winds were already rattling the walls of the monarchy. Charles tried to steady himself, but even his presence faltered. He looked neither at his wife nor at his daughter-in-law. Instead, his gaze fell to the floor, as if the polished stone beneath his feet held the answers he no longer dared to seek in the faces around him. For so long, he had been guided by loyalty to Camilla. Loyalty to a narrative built around her devotion. Loyalty to an image the palace demanded he defend. But loyalty is fragile when tested by truth. And in that chamber, even loyalty began to wither. The whispers grew sharper, slicing through the silence like knives. The lies. The lies. The words leapt from mouth to mouth, carried by both fear and anticipation. These whispers were not speculation. They were expectation rumors born from corridors and kitchens, from staff who had seen too much, from family members who had said too little. Catherine had come not only with a voice, but with the weight of every silenced tongue behind her. The moment felt historic, a collision of past and present. Centuries of royal tradition, power wrapped in velvet and crown, stood against something far more dangerous than political enemies or rebellious parliaments. They stood against truth, spoken plainly by one who could no longer be silenced. The chamber, once designed to exalt power, now carried the air of humiliation. It was no longer the monarchy presiding, it was justice. And so the stage was set. The king, the queen, and the princess. A triangle bound not by ceremony, but by betrayal, resolve, and an unyielding pursuit of truth. The confrontation no one thought possible had arrived, and the walls themselves seemed to lean forward, desperate to hear what would be said. The monarchy would never be the same again after this day. For this was not merely a trial of facts, it was a trial of character, of loyalty, of lies that had festered in shadows too long. But before Catherine speaks, the lies themselves must, first, be unveiled. For years, Camilla spun stories that fortified her place beside the king. But beneath every carefully woven tale lay cracks that Catherine was now prepared to expose. The world had been presented with an image of loyalty, of sacrifice, of a woman who had endured scorn, yet emerged as Charles's unwavering companion. Camilla's narrative was one of resilience, a tale carefully polished to win sympathy, to rewrite history, and to present herself not as an interloper, but as destiny fulfilled. But behind the grandeur of speeches and the polished veneer of appearances, the truth whispered differently than the truth that Catherine had quietly pieced together in silence. Behind closed doors, Camilla was not the selfless figure painted for the public eye. She was sharp, deliberate, and relentless in shaping Charles's every decision. In moments unseen by the world, she whispered into his ear, guiding his choices with words laced in persuasion. Decisions that once seemed rooted in duty bore the fingerprints of her influence. Allies noticed subtle shifts, appointments made, traditions bent, priorities rearranged. And yet, each adjustment came wrapped in the guise of Charles's will, masking Camilla's hand beneath the fabric of monarchy. Those who served closest to the royal household began to murmur. Accounts conflicted with the official story. One aide described one version of events, only for another to reveal details that contradicted it entirely. Pieces did not fit, timelines twisted strangely, and stories rehearsed in public fell apart. In private, whispers grew into questions, and questions swelled into suspicion. It was not only Catherine who noticed, but those who had long stood in the background, too afraid to confront the hand that wielded silent control. Catherine, however, was not blind. In family councils, her eyes lingered not on the words spoken, but on the pauses between them, on the subtle way Camilla steered conversations. She watched how Charles leaned toward her, how his resolve softened when she pressed, how a kingdom's course seemed to tilt under the weight of whispered counsel. Yet Catherine said nothing. She remained still, a figure of grace, but her silence was not ignorance, it was strategy. For in her silence, she gathered strength. The deeper she looked, the darker the threads became. These lies were not mere distortions of character. They reached into the marrow of the monarchy itself. They shaped matters of succession, steering whispers of who should rise and who should fall. They touched the delicate balance of finances and legacies, moving wealth and titles like chess pieces on a hidden board. They even eroded the bonds of loyalty, pitting brother against brother, and sowing fractures that no crown could repair. What had once been dismissed as personal ambition was now revealed as a web stretching over the entire institution. It was no longer simply a question of personal rivalry or family tension. The monarchy itself was at stake. The foundation of trust, the sacred duty to truth, the very bond between sovereign and subject all were endangered by a web of deceit woven for power and control. The world was about to see that the crisis unfolding in the courtroom was not born overnight. It had been growing silently, like a shadow in the rafters, waiting for the moment when the light would strike and reveal its full form. And when the UCCE first piece of evidence surfaced, it was Catherine who chose to bring it into the light. Long before the courtroom showdown, Catherine had already been piecing together Camilla's deception, moving like a shadow through corridors of secrecy. While the public saw her as the picture of composure, behind that calm exterior lay a sharp mind quietly assembling fragments of truth. She had learned early that within the palace, truth did not arrive in declarations. It hid in whispers, in glances, in the details others dismissed. And so she listened. She listened to staff recount half-remembered conversations, to attendants who spoke of small inconsistencies, to aides who dared to mutter contradictions behind closed doors. Each word, each fragment, was stored, weighed, and placed carefully within the puzzle Catherine was determined to complete. At first, it seemed like nothing more than subtle oddities. A document signed when Charles was abroad, a directive that bore his name, but not his hand. A shift in tone that mirrored not his voice, but Camilla's persuasion. Catherine noticed, though she never reacted. Her silence was her shield. In family councils, she played the part expected of her, dutiful, reserved, watchful. But in that very stillness, she absorbed everything, catching the movements others ignored. And when she felt herself wavering, when the weight of knowledge pressed heavy upon her, she turned quietly to Anne. Princess Anne, hardened by decades within the machinery of monarchy, recognized the danger of Catherine's suspicions. She warned her to be cautious, to tread carefully, for Camilla was not without influence, and the crown had a way of protecting itself even at the cost of truth. Yet even as Anne urged restraint, she also gave Catherine the reassurance she needed, that she was not imagining shadows, that the patterns she noticed were real. In hushed exchanges, Anne became both confidant and compass, her presence steadying Catherine's resolve. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A set of private correspondences. They were not meant for Catherine's eyes, yet fate, or perhaps betrayal within Camilla's own circle, brought them to her. Letters that revealed more than simple counsel. They suggested a hand not merely advising, but directing royal decisions of profound weight, decisions about patronages, appointments, even discussions tied to the sensitive matter of succession. What should have been the sovereign's will bore the unmistakable touch of Camilla's ambition. Catherine read them in silence, her heart pounding with the enormity of what she held. For in those letters lay the proof that the whispers were not rumor, but reality. Yet, Catherine said nothing. She did not confront, did not accuse, did not risk her discovery too soon. Instead, she chose the patience of a hunter, waiting for the moment when exposure would not simply raise questions, but deliver a blow too heavy to deflect. The choice came at a cost. Her silence became a burden she carried alone, straining her bond with William. He sensed her distance, her guarded words, her sleepless nights. She could not yet tell him the full weight of what she bore, for even trust within the family could be perilous when lies ran so deep. Each day the toll grew heavier. Every smile before the public concealed the war within her. Every handshake, every wave, every appearance carried the knowledge that she alone held the thread that could unravel the crown. It was her weapon, her protection, but also her greatest risk. For should Camilla learn of Catherine's knowledge too soon, the consequences would be devastating. But Catherine endured, for she knew that truth delayed was not truth denied. It was truth prepared for its most powerful moment. And so, when Catherine stood in court, she did not come empty-handed. She came armed with revelation. The silence of the courtroom was shattered by Catherine's first words. Simple, piercing, undeniable. Camilla's mask began to crack. The room had braced for a confrontation, but no one expected the swiftness with which Catherine struck. In her hands were letters, aged yet unmistakable, carrying words that burned through Camilla's carefully cultivated image. These were not whispers or rumors, not vague allegations open to dismissal. They were undeniable records, each line contradicting the very story Camilla had paraded before the world. With calm precision, Catherine read aloud the words that tore through years of deception, and in that instant, the monarchy trembled. The reaction was immediate. Gasps filled the chamber like a wave crashing against stone. Courtiers clutched at pearls, aides froze in disbelief, and the press scribbled furiously, ink spilling onto pages that would carry the scandal across the globe within hours. Each word Catherine spoke landed like a thunderclap, reverberating through centuries of silence that had shielded royal secrets. For once, it was not the crown dictating the narrative, it was truth, raw and unfiltered, forcing its way into the light. Camilla sat rigid, her face a studied portrait of composure. She forced her lips into a line of cold resolve, yet her body betrayed her. A tremor in her hands, a glance too swift, shoulders that tensed with each sentence Catherine delivered. To the untrained eye, she appeared calm. But those who knew her well saw the cracks. They saw the unease seeping through, the desperation of a woman who had spent decades constructing an empire of words, now watching it unravel in front of her. And there sat Charles, caught in the cruelest of positions. His body leaned toward his wife, as though duty compelled him to defend her, yet his eyes remained fixed on the letters, on the truth staring back at him. For a man who had long balanced love with obligation, loyalty with perception, this was the breaking point. How could he shield Camilla from accusations when the very evidence denied her claims? And yet, how could he abandon her when she was the one he had fought so hard to legitimize? Each line Catherine read cut him deeper, each truth forcing him to choose between his heart and his crown. Catherine's voice did not falter. It carried the weight of conviction, a steadiness born not from anger but from duty. She was not simply a woman exposing a rival. She was a future queen, breaking centuries of silence, daring to hold the monarchy accountable. Every syllable seemed to slice through the chamber, forcing even those loyal to Camilla to shift uncomfortably in their seats. For once, no one could deny the power of what was being revealed. The monarchy itself seemed to quiver beneath the strain of truth. This was not a private scandal whispered in tabloids or speculated over dinner tables. This was a reckoning unfolding under oath, before witnesses, before history itself. What Catherine had begun could not be undone. The weight of the crown no longer protected Camilla's lies. Instead, it amplified their collapse. The institution that once silenced dissent now carried the echo of Catherine's words for all to hear. But this was only the first strike that would bring Charles to his knees. A king is expected to rule with unshakable strength. But on this day, Charles could no longer contain the storm inside him. As Catherine's evidence mounted, the weight of her words bore down like stones upon his chest. What began with letters exposing lies soon evolved into something far more damning. Financial inconsistencies buried deep within palace accounts, signatures attached to decisions he knew were not his alone, and hidden correspondence that revealed how far Camilla's hand had reached. With every page Catherine presented, the walls around Charles's carefully constructed loyalty began to crumble. Those who watched him closely saw the change as it happened. The once firm jawline slackened, his lips trembled, his eyes darted toward the letters as though searching desperately for some explanation that might absolve him of having believed them for so long. But there was none. The truth stood before him, undeniable and merciless. The love he had fought to defend, the woman he had shielded against all criticism, now stood revealed as the source of his deepest humiliation. Devotion, the very foundation of his marriage, collided brutally with truth, and Charles's face betrayed it all. Witnesses would later recall the moment as one of unbearable fragility. A monarch, stripped of the armor of dignity, undone not by a foreign enemy or political upheaval, but by betrayal within the closest circle of his heart. His eyes glazed, his body shuddered, and then, before the world, Charles wept. Not in silence, not in the privacy of chambers, but openly, in the court, where history itself seemed to be watching. Gasps swept through the gallery as tears fell, the image of the king shattering centuries of expectation. For a crown that symbolized endurance and strength, the sight of its bearer breaking down was almost too much to comprehend. The courtroom shifted in an instant. What had been a scandal now bore the weight of tragedy. Even those who came to revel in Camilla's unmasking found themselves struck with sympathy for the man who sat weeping under the eyes of his people. The press, who only moments earlier had scribbled with fervor, slowed their pens as though stunned by the gravity of what they were witnessing. This was no longer just an exposé. It was the public unraveling of a legacy. Charles's cries were not only for himself, but for the monarchy that had become the stage for his collapse. At that moment, centuries of royal resilience felt fragile. The crown, gleaming in history's pages, appeared vulnerable, its strength tethered to the humanity of the man who wore it. Catherine's evidence had not only revealed Camilla's lies, but had also torn open the raw wound of a king betrayed by the one he trusted most. For the first time, Britain's sovereign looked less like a ruler and more like a man crushed beneath the weight of love, duty, and deceit. A royal legacy collapsed in real time before the world. It was no longer a question of image, nor of reputation, but of survival. The monarchy itself teetered in the balance, and as Charles fell apart, Camilla fought harder than ever to maintain her grip on the crown. Like a cornered predator, Camilla lashed out not with fists, but with words designed to wound, confuse, and claw her way back to control. The courtroom, already heavy with the weight of Charles's collapse, now shook with her fury. Her eyes flashed, and her voice, though trembling with rage, cut through the silence like a blade. She turned not on the evidence, not on the undeniable letters and accounts that had been laid bare, but on Catherine herself. In a torrent of accusations, Camilla painted the princess not as a bearer of truth, but as a schemer, driven by ambition and envy. She accused Catherine of using her influence to manipulate the family, of plotting for years to tarnish her reputation and secure her own rise. To those who did not know better, her words might have sounded desperate but plausible. Yet to those who had witnessed Catherine's grace and restraint, they rang hollow. Her desperation did not end there. With every syllable, Camilla widened her attack, dragging Anne and William into her accusations. She claimed Anne had whispered poison into Catherine's ear, urging her to dismantle Camilla's position. She charged William with orchestrating the campaign to elevate his wife at the expense of his father's peace. It was an audacious move, an attempt to scatter suspicion across the entire royal family, to muddy the waters so thoroughly that the truth would seem indistinguishable from lies. Yet the more she spoke, the more her words betrayed her. For all her rehearsed poise, her voice wavered, her tone sharp with panic, her fury unmistakable. The effect was immediate and damning. Rather than restoring her control, her words ignited the scandal further. What had begun as an exposure of deceit now swelled into a full-blown spectacle of division. The press scribbled with feverish intensity, eager to record every accusation, every name she dragged into her defense. The public, already teetering on disillusionment, watched as a queen consort once seen as steadfast revealed herself to be combustible, erratic, and dangerously consumed by survival. In her attempt to claw her way out, she had only dug herself deeper. And yet, through it all, Catherine remained still. She did not rise to defend herself. She did not match Camilla's volume or anger. Instead, she held her silence, her composure becoming its own weapon. Every moment, she refused to descend into chaos made Camilla's outbursts appear all the more frantic. The contrast between the two women could not have been more striking. One unraveling before the world, the other embodying the very dignity the crown was meant to represent. It was no longer a clash of words. It was a war of character, of desperation, against integrity. The balance of perception tilted swiftly. While Camilla's fury alienated even those who once sympathized with her, Catherine's composure drew admiration. People began to whisper that they were witnessing the passing of a mantle not by decree, but by sheer presence. One queen consort was crumbling, and another, without ever needing to declare it, was rising in her place. It was not the crown that chose Catherine at that moment, it was the people. Yet Catherine was not finished. Her final evidence would silence even Camilla's fury. The moment Catherine revealed the final document, the air left the room. It was the proof that ended Camilla's narrative forever. The chamber, already drowning in tension, fell into a silence so heavy that even breathing seemed dangerous. From the bundle of evidence Catherine had carried, she drew one last piece, carefully sealed, untouched by time, yet burning with the weight of history. It bore the unmistakable crest of Queen Elizabeth II. The late monarch's hand, preserved in ink, was about to speak beyond the grave, and no one, not even Camilla, could escape its authority. Catherine's voice did not waver as she unfolded the note. With measured calm, she read aloud words that contradicted everything Camilla had claimed about her role, her loyalty, and her supposed blessing from the Queen. In those lines, Elizabeth had not named Camilla as the beacon of continuity or devotion. Instead, she had written of Catherine herself, of her grace, her unshakable sense of duty, her integrity that stood unblemished in the darkest of storms. The late Queen's words, recorded without fanfare, praised Catherine not only as William's partner, but as a woman capable of carrying the monarchy's dignity into the future. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Gasps filled the chamber, followed by sobs from those who had served the late Queen and knew the power of her words. To hear Elizabeth's voice once more, even through ink and paper, felt like judgment rendered from beyond the grave. Her words, simple yet decisive, ripped apart Camilla's carefully built tower of influence. Where Camilla had claimed approval, there was none. Where she had implied succession secured, the Queen had chosen another. And in that devastating moment, Camilla's silence became louder than any denial she could have spoken. Her lips, once quick with accusations, now pressed shut. Her eyes, once burning with defiance, darted downward, as though searching for ground firm enough to stand on. But there was none. The lies, so fiercely defended, now lay in ashes around her. The Queen's note was more than evidence. It was a death knell for Camilla's narrative, a final and irrefutable strike. Across the chamber, Charles broke once more. If before he had wept in despair, now his collapse carried an even deeper torment. His hands trembled as he reached for the letter, clinging to it as if the words of his late mother were the last tether holding him together. To the world, he was a king undone. To himself, he was a son rebuked by the voice he had most longed to honor. His shoulders sagged under the crushing realization that everything he had defended now stood exposed as falsehood. It was at that moment the monarchy itself appeared to shift. Power, once contested in shadows and whispers, seemed to reorient before the eyes of all present. Catherine's place was no longer a matter of speculation or rivalry. It had been stamped by the authority of the late Queen, carried forth by the will of history itself. In that courtroom, crowns and titles felt secondary to the truth, and the truth had chosen Catherine. But what happens when the lies are gone, and only shattered lives remain? The courtroom emptied, but the echoes of Catherine's words haunted every corner of the palace. What had unfolded in that chamber was not a scandal to be managed, nor a fleeting storm to be weathered. It was a reckoning, and the aftermath spread like cracks through marble, reaching every hall, every chamber, every heart. Charles, once so determined to project strength, could not face the world. Broken, wounded, and publicly undone, he withdrew from his duties, leaving a silence at the head of the monarchy that only deepened the sense of uncertainty. His absence became a symbol of the cost of deception, a monarch unable to stand beneath the weight of his own unraveling. In that void, all eyes turned toward William and Catherine. They had not sought this moment, yet it was thrust upon them by truth itself. Where Charles faltered, they stood steady. Their presence together measured, composed, united became a lifeline for a monarchy teetering on collapse. Public perception shifted overnight. Crowds that once cheered the king now rallied behind his son and daughter-in-law, not merely out of admiration, but out of need. Britain craved stability, honesty, and dignity, and in Catherine, they found a figure who embodied all three. For many, she had already become more than a princess. She was their anchor in a sea of betrayal. Princess Anne, ever the stoic, emerged as Catherine's unspoken ally. She praised her bravery privately, but, more importantly, defended it publicly, framing Catherine's actions not as rebellion, but as service to truth. In doing so, Anne sealed Catherine's place in royal history. For the first time in generations, a woman had stood against deceit at the heart of the monarchy and refused to be silenced. Anne's support, coupled with the admiration of the people, made Catherine untouchable. Her courage was no longer questioned, it was revered. Meanwhile, Camilla's isolation grew unbearable. Once untouchable, shielded by her husband's devotion and palace protocol, she now found herself despised both within and beyond the palace walls. The allies she once counted on grew scarce, their loyalty evaporating as quickly as her influence. The whispers that once worked in her favor turned venomous, casting her not as the queen consort, but as the architect of division and downfall. In corridors where she once walked with authority, she now moved in shadows, her presence resented rather than respected. Beyond the palace gates, the public's verdict was clear. They called Catherine the People's Queen. It was not a title written into law or decreed by the crown. It was bestowed in the hearts of millions who saw in her a reflection of honesty, sacrifice, and courage. Crowds gathered not for Charles, nor for Camilla, but for her. The chants, the banners, the flood of voices declared a truth louder than any royal decree. Catherine was the future. And so, the monarchy faced a choice unlike any it had confronted before. Would it adapt to truth, reshaping itself around the strength of Catherine's integrity? Or would it collapse beneath the weight of deceit, dragging centuries of tradition down with it? The answer lingered in uncertainty, for though the lies had been shattered, the damage they left behind was vast and unrelenting. The palace was not merely wounded, it was at a crossroads, and as the dust settled, whispers of what came next began to surface, whispers that would decide the monarchy's future forever. Was this the beginning of a renewed monarchy led by truth, or the final chapter of a dynasty undone by its own lies? The question echoed across the nation as Charles's future grew uncertain, his reign weakened beyond repair by revelations too devastating to ignore. In the void left by his collapse, Catherine rose not by force, nor by decree, but by the undeniable weight of her integrity. She became the moral center of the royal family, the figure who carried the people's trust when the crown itself faltered. William, once content to wait for his time, now found himself preparing for a role larger and sooner than he ever imagined. his path forever altered by the firestorm that consumed his father's reign. Meanwhile, Camilla faded from the public stage. But her silence carried menace. Whispers hinted that she plotted in the shadows, unwilling to surrender her grip entirely. Beyond palace walls, the people demanded reform, transparency, and leadership that reflected Catherine's courage. They no longer wanted silence and secrecy. They wanted a monarchy rebuilt on truth. And so the world stood divided, torn between hope and ruin, asking whether truth had saved the monarchy or whether it had been the very weapon that destroyed it. One thing is certain, the monarchy will never be the same again. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.